Hi, I'm deep in the reeds, and by the time this video goes up, I'll be deep in Peru or Bolivia or somewhere, but I thought before I left that I would do a review that I've been meaning to do for a long time, ever since I read this book last year and was completely blown away by it. The book is called An Instance of the Fingerpost by Iain Pears. Iain Pears is an art historian who became a novelist. He wrote the Jonathan Argyll detective series, but he also wrote a lot of standalone novels, including this chunker right here. So this is a murder mystery set in England during the 1600s, told from four perspectives. Now, the 1600s in England were incredibly turbulent. There were all these civil wars, the king had been overthrown, Oliver Cromwell tried to start a republic, and by the time this novel starts, there's a new king on the throne, but all these political and religious tensions are still simmering beneath the surface. And on top of that, there was this new rise in science and academics, which was a big challenge to religion. So it seemed like all of these age-old institutions were suddenly on shaky footing. Throw into all of that a murdered Oxford Don and a pariah woman who takes all the blame. But as you read on, you learn that there's a lot more going on to this murder than meets the eye, and you're taken all around England. You go from the lowest to the highest born in the land, piecing things together. This may seem like a kind of intimidating novel to get into, especially because of how long it is, but trust me, it is so worth the read. One of the things that makes this book so unique is the structure, because instead of intercutting between the four perspectives all throughout the length of the book, you get each perspective in block chunks. It's almost like reading four separate novels, and each perspective is narrated as a written document in the context of this story, where the character is trying to defend and justify themselves, all while pointing the finger at everybody else. They're just like, I had nothing to do with it, and if anyone says otherwise, they're lying. And then you get the next perspective, and it's like, no, he's lying! So you start having to take into account the motivations and the biases of all of these narrators and working out who's being honest and all this other stuff. And they get so wrapped up in their own petty squabbles and their own issues that the murder almost falls into the background while the story sets up stuff that comes back in unexpected ways later on. For the most part, the stories of each narrator are very disparate from one another, but of course you get parts where those stories intersect with each other, and you get the same scene told to you in different ways. The way the book does it is so great, because a scene which you don't think that much about at first ends up taking on a whole different significance as the story goes along. There's this dinner scene early on, which is fairly mundane on the surface, but it quickly becomes apparent to you that it's one of the most important scenes in the whole story. So the book feels very real in all of its complexities, and it leaves you so curious to see how another person's point of view changes the story. The interconnected writing of a book like this takes a lot of skill to pull off, and Pears does great with it. There's all these twists and turns and shadowy figures who might be controlling things from behind the scenes. You can't really trust anyone, including the narrators, but at the same time, it's surprising how funny this book can get. There were so many times reading it where I was just like laughing out loud, and the humor isn't forced at all. It's very organic, situational humor, or humor that plays off the characters clashing heads throughout the book. It's just very tightly written. Even the style of the writing changes from one perspective to another. In addition to the four narrators, you get this colorful cast of thousands, and it's a good blend of fictional and historical people. Two of my favorite characters in this book ended up being real people from history. There's John Thurlow, who was the former spy master under Oliver Cromwell, or Richard Lower, who is the guy who invented blood transfusions. Lower is particularly hilarious because his early motivation in the book is to find a corpse to experiment on, so we go with him to death row where he's asking inmates like, hey, do you mind if I use your body after they hang you? You're not going to be using it. And then when that doesn't work, he asks one of his doctor friends, hey, do you have any particularly sick patients? Of course, you can't really set a historical novel in the 1600s without inundating your characters with the bigotry of the times. So naturally, Pears gives a lot of the characters these really deep-rooted prejudices against different social classes, religious groups, political groups. On top of that, the characters are also very arrogant and mean, and self-serving, a lot of them can get violent, and some of them may or may not have a screw loose, but it's a lot of fun spending time with these characters, especially because Pears makes you understand why they think the way that they do, and a lot of them are basically good people at heart. It's just that they happen to have grown up in this cultural context that puts all of these prejudices into them, and this of course plays into the book's themes, because the book is about parsing out the truth in a very divided world, and how our cultural context and our biases and whatever act as these blinders that will make us jump to conclusions. Because the narrative is structured in a way to keep you guessing, you find yourself also jumping to conclusions based on your own preconceived notions, your own biases and things like that. So it's a very meta way of really getting you into the characters' heads. The conflict between science and superstition is a big part of this theme, and this conflict is going on within all of the narrator characters. They're all supposed to be searching for truth in their professions. Like, one is a doctor, there's a lawyer, there's a historian, and there's a code breaker. And at the same time, they all feel like they're on this mission from God and will use divine explanations at the drop of a hat. You'll have doctors charting the position of Venus to determine how to treat a patient. They'll try and find out who the murderer is by putting a suspect in the room with the body to see if the body spontaneously starts bleeding. And all of this goes to making the world feel very magical and mystical, to the point where it almost feels like you're reading a fantasy novel at times. But of course, because they're so prone to superstitions, you end up questioning the reliability of all of the narrators. And that comes to a head in the final narrative of this book, where we get a full-blown Christ allegory and you realize you've basically been reading 4 Gospels. It's maybe a little bit heavy-handed for some people, but I would argue that it could just be his perception being warped by his superstitions that's making for this very magical, heavily religious ending. I really loved how it finished up. There's a great climax, there's a lot of twist reveals thrown at you, and although I guessed a lot of them, I didn't guess all of them, so I was still pretty surprised. And even putting the mystery aside, there's so much going on with the characters and the story and the drama that the mystery just ends up being sort of icing on the cake. Aside from a little bit too much melodrama at the ending, the book doesn't really have that many flaws. The biggest one, I would say, is that it suffers from a bit of a weak middle section, especially in the second perspective. I read this with a few friends and we all agreed that the second perspective is the worst, but we also all agreed that the first and last perspectives were the best. So the book starts well and it pays everything off really well at the end too. Like, even the middle stuff seems better in retrospect, because you realize a lot of the middle section is just set up for a bunch of stuff to get paid off later down the road. The other thing to say is that each time a new perspective starts, it kind of pulls you out of the story a bit, because you need to get your bearings all over again and sort of adjust to the new situations that you're being plopped into. But that's really minor. That just comes part and parcel with the premise of this book. So yeah, generally, if you're feeling the middle section's a bit weak, just push through, because trust me, it pays off really well. Instance of the Fingerpost was one of the best books I read all of last year. I would give it an 8 out of 10. It has a few minor blemishes, but they're totally outshone by the book's strengths. It's a really strong story, there's a lot of great characters that jump right out of the page at you, and although it's very dark at times, it's also very funny in an organic sort of way. So if you're into mystery novels or intrigue or anything like that, please pick this book up. I highly recommend it. So yeah, there's my review. Have you read this book? What did you think about it? What are some other good mystery novels I should read? It'll be a while before I respond to any comments because I'm away for now. So I guess I'll respond when I get back, and there will be more videos from me soon enough. Alright, I'm gonna head out now. See you later.